Kirapat hesitated slightly as she saw the little girl step forward before they left, whispering something to her mother and then gently hugging her. When they let go, somehow, the pressure from both their gazes fell on her. Bonita looked at her as if waiting for something, while her eyes remained as always unreadable. The young woman had always believed that she had grown up, mature enough to navigate life with intelligence and composure. She once thought there was nothing left she didn't understand. But clearly, she was wrong because now, Kirapat could not read her mother's expression. She didn't know what her mother was thinking or planning to do. The truth was, her so-called maturity wasn't all that grand. It felt small in a life where there were still people she longed for and loved deeply. People whose advice she always listened to. Kirapat admitted to herself that she had been acting too impulsively these past few days. But even so, she held on to one firm belief, that her brother deserved to marry and live with the person he truly loved. At least, as a sister, he should have the right to decide that for himself. Because children born to parents who never truly wanted them, born only to meet societal expectations, they feel, think, and get hurt in ways that she and her brother, Kita, understood better than anyone else. Queen. Bonita's gentle voice pulled Kirapat's mind back to the present. Come here. She softened her voice once again when she saw her lover finally turn her attention toward her. Bonita hadn't always been this brave, but she understood very clearly that Kirapat loved and respected her mother immensely. The only thing that could make Kirapat tense enough for it to show on her face, surely, it had to be the argument with her mother last week. She had argued with her mother, worried that her brother might walk a path of unhappiness, and on top of that, she had to face someone secretly watching her lover. It wasn't surprising that someone usually so composed could become slightly off balance. On the outside, Kirapat always appeared perfect, like an unshakable, solid wall. But even the tallest wall needs a foundation. It needs the ground to hold it up. For her, that ground was family and the people she loved. When the ground shifted, the wall had to tilt along with it. No one can stay strong forever. Sooner or later, everyone needs a support. And when that wall starts to wobble, the least Bonita could do was protect it from cracking. That was why Bonita had gathered enough courage to whisper a request to her mother-in-law, something she had never dared to do before. There was always a respectful distance between her and her lover's mother, and it was Bonita herself who had drawn that line, because she believed she shouldn't intrude. Even though Kirapat loved her, that didn't mean everyone else in her family would feel the same. May I hug you, ma'am, before we leave? At first, her mother-in-law seemed surprised, but perhaps she understood what Bonita was trying to do, and she nodded. From her gaze to her aura, Bonita felt as if she were looking at her lover 30 years into the future. Kirapat had truly inherited so much from her mother. Queen over here. Bonita called again when she saw her lover still standing still. But the corner of her mouth twitched slightly, almost like a smile, when she saw Kirapat slowly step forward, carefully approaching her and her mother. Let's go. Kirapat spoke coldly. She had already said goodbye, so she didn't understand why Bonita was calling her back. That's exactly why I called you, because it's time for us to leave. One eyebrow rose in silent question, but Bonita's eyes clearly pleaded. She wanted Kirapat to do something. Something that even Kirapat wasn't entirely sure she understood. You called me back to. My love, aren't you going to say goodbye to ma'am? Just that one question made Kirapat immediately understand Bonita's game. So the reason she hugged her mother first was to pull her along, to ensure that both of them would say goodbye in the same way. After many months, Kirapat was able to hug her mother again. She had expected the embrace to feel cold and distant after all the recent disagreements. But no. For Kirapat, her mother's arms were still as warm as ever. It made her feel like a small child in this vast world, a bird that no matter how far it flies, will always find its way back to the nest. Her mother had always held an important place in her heart, and she had forgotten that. The tense atmosphere between mother and daughter softened with just one hug, and it was all thanks to Bonita, that little rascal, now sitting beside her, smiling on the way back to the penthouse. "Why are you so happy? You keep smiling." Bonita giggled. Though the threat of being watched was still a worry, compared to today's small victory, it suddenly felt trivial. "You made me hug my mom. You planned it all along, didn't you? Even cooking that dish." Bonita nodded without trying to hide anything. She didn't like seeing Kira Pat surrounded by such a gloomy mood. Her Kira Pat should stand tall, proud, fixing her hair on her throne with all the grace she naturally possessed, just like always. "I considered everything, and this seems to be what stressed you out the most. You may never say it, but I know your mom and Kita are the two most important people in your life. Is that so?" Kira Pat whispered. She hadn't realized she was being observed so closely. But it wasn't surprising. Bonita was intelligent and perceptive. She had always been that way. And Kira Pat had fallen in love with those very qualities from the very beginning. And then everything came at once, you piking, then the argument with your mom. So, when I started comparing them. Before Bonita could finish, her lover suddenly steered the car to the side of the road without warning. The little girl almost screamed. She thought someone had ambushed them, a group of people in black, political enemies of Khun Phuying, coming to harm them. But no, nothing had happened, except for the warm embrace her lover unexpectedly gave her. "You scared me," Bonita whispered as she realized there was no danger. She relaxed, wrapped her arms around her, and gently patted her lover's back. "What's wrong? Wanna tell me?" Kira Pat shook her head, but kept holding her tightly until the car seat became uncomfortable. Only then did she slowly let go and softly say, "Thank you." Bonita raised an eyebrow. "For what?" And then, above even the hug, Bonita received a kiss, warm, steady, pressed firmly to her lips. "For everything." Meanwhile, the boring party dragged on endlessly for Kita. He walked beside Pyram, who behaved no differently than a machine carrying out her father's orders. Of course, he had noticed that her father had called her back just to scold her because she walked beside him without linking arms or showing closeness. She looked so uncomfortable that he felt heavy-hearted as well. Honestly, in his eyes, Pyram seemed more like a younger sister than someone he could develop romantic feelings for. He began to worry that what Kira Pat had once said might actually be true. If the two of them married and then tried to play the roles of husband and wife without genuine desire, it could later lead to serious consequences. "Do you want to go somewhere?" He leaned slightly, speaking softly enough that only the two of them could hear. The reason he had agreed to this marriage was because of his mother. But now, realizing that this union could lead to unhappiness, not just for him, especially when the fiancé clearly looked so distressed, Kita felt he could no longer stand by silently. She didn't even try to hide the fact that she was tensing herself just to stay beside him. Perhaps they needed to find an escape together. Pyram looked up at the man nearly 4 inches taller than her and nodded slightly. Still, her eyes darted around quickly to make sure none of her father's people were nearby. "As long as it's a place where I can breathe easier than here." It was strange, Bonita thought, because today her lover had parked in the usual lot near the office building instead of dropping her off right at the door like usual. "Where are you going, Queen? I need to use the restroom." Just for a moment. In all the time they had been together, she had never once needed to use the restroom here. And when it came to cleanliness, Kira Pat always avoided public restrooms unless absolutely necessary. "You parked here just to walk 15 extra minutes into the building. Just to go to the restroom?" Bonita asked, surprised, as she saw the woman beside her tapping her heels on the curb. She carried nothing but her phone and car keys, while Bonita had her handbag and meeting documents, looking no different than a secretary walking beside her boss. I need to go right now. Do you know how long it would take if I hit every red light along the way? Over 30 minutes. Bonita sighed. If she still had enough energy to argue like that, then her mood had definitely improved quite a bit. You're always picky about which restroom to use. So why do you suddenly want to use the one in my office building today? Isn't that a little suspicious? Kirapat almost pinched her lover's lips. Talkative as ever, so many questions. But she wasn't wrong. If it weren't truly necessary, Kirapat would never choose to come here just to use the restroom. Many eyes were on them. Kirapat, tall and elegant, walking beside Bonita. Everyone knew she was a well-known businesswoman, the illegitimate daughter of a high-profile politician. So, why was she walking with an office employee like Bonita? I'll go to work. You can use the restroom on the lower floor, Bonita said. Kirapat didn't reply immediately. Instead, Bonita handed her meeting documents to her lover and hurried into the convenience store at the base of the building, returning only a few minutes later with a white and green pack of antibacterial wipes. Use this to wipe the toilet first. I have to prepare for a meeting. Her mixed expression at that moment was still as adorable as ever. To Kirapat, that clueless look was truly cute, so much so that if they weren't in public and she didn't have important work to return to, she might have pulled Bonita in for a kiss until that frown disappeared. You're going into a meeting with that scowling face? Who's going to buy anything for you like that? Then stop acting so weird and just tell me what you're doing. I need to know. The corners of Kirapat's lips curved into a faint smile. The sharpness in her eyes softened as she looked at the girl she loved. I just need to use the restroom. Haven't you ever had to go urgently? You don't look like someone in a hurry at all. Arguing with me takes longer than that. Her long, slender hand ran through Bonita's hair, messing up the neatly combed style, making her frown even more. Because arguing with you makes me happy. Bonita had nothing more to say. She lowered her head, awkwardly hiding her flushed cheeks. She snatched the stack of documents from her lover's hand and walked a few quick steps. I'm heading to work, Phuying. Kirapat nodded. I hope nothing bothers you today. Except for joy. Truly a queen-like blessing, Bonita thought to herself. Thank you. Once her lover was out of sight, Kirapat's expression returned to its usual calm. Curious eyes around immediately turned away when she looked up, not because she was trying to intimidate anyone, but simply because she needed to observe the surrounding area. After all, she had said she was here just to use the restroom, so she kept her word. Inside, it was as clean as expected for a high-end office building, with a faint scent of disinfectant in the air. Kirapat stepped in to wash her hands, but before she could leave, 2 employees entered. The smell of disinfectant was instantly overpowered by an overpowering perfume, making her feel uncomfortable. I didn't see that little girl's luxury car dropping her off today. Little girl? The way they said it gave Kirapat an odd feeling. She carried a stack of documents in the elevator like a donkey. Too bad we didn't get to greet her like usual. Don't let the boss hear that. Now she's the company's darling. Just closed a deal with Khun. Ah. Now Kirapat knew who they were talking about. But her lover was not the little girl they had just called with such disdain. Who knows if she closed the deal because of her ability or because the boss is infatuated with her. Always calling up to the office, praising her nonstop. Need I ask? Just wait. When we go into the meeting room, she'll be sitting next to the boss again. Not surprising. I heard she used to work at a bar. Maybe she still hasn't shaken off the old habits. Wait. Are you all talking about someone named Bonita? Of course, Kirapat would not let those who slandered her lover get away with it, especially when their words could hurt Bonita. The woman being questioned flinched, unsettled by Kirapat's presence and tone. There was something in her aura that made the other person feel overwhelmed, prompting her to instinctively step back as Kira Pat advanced. I'll ask again. The little girl you just mentioned, was that Babe Bonita's nickname? No.
No.
I don't know what you're talking about. Let's go. We're late for the meeting. Kira Pat followed them a few steps before stopping. She clenched her fists, controlled her breathing, and reminded herself that more important matters awaited. The CCTV footage Lynn had sent her was missing a few angles. Not altered, just seemingly gone entirely. That didn't make sense. In a high-end building like this, it was hard to believe that some areas would be left without surveillance. She left the restroom and headed straight to the area where the footage was missing. The spot was about 200 meters from the main entrance and could be accessed from the front, the side, and the back of the building. In other words, it was a thoroughfare. Anyone could pass through without raising suspicion. It was also the designated smoking area. The smell in the air made her pause for a moment. If it clung to her clothes, Bonita would surely complain during dinner. Kira Pat quickly changed direction, walking against the wind to avoid it, her eyes still scanning the area. There it was. The surveillance camera was mounted high above. The red light blinking proved it was still operational.
Then,
why was the footage from this angle missing in the file Lynn had sent? Now that she had identified what she needed, Kira Pat immediately left the area. She didn't want the smell of smoke to cling to her. Bonita would sulk again. That girl was always complaining that Kira Pat didn't take care of herself. But who would want to die early and leave that girl alone in this vast world? Certainly not Kira Pat. She sent her new discovery to her best friend in a few brief messages. But just as she was about to turn and look again, one thing became even clearer. The spot where she had been standing was exactly where Bonita usually waited. And the location was perfect for hiding. There were pillars and people gathered there. Smoking provided cover, a perfect place to observe without being noticed. But more importantly, Kira Pat had made a decision. She would teach Bonita to drive. She would take her to choose a car she liked. She would let her drive herself to work. She would turn the story that the two gossiping women had spun from Bonita is driven to work in a luxury car into Bonita drives herself to work in a luxury car.